Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. We have got lots of interesting stuff to talk about again today. There have been tons of news coverage statewide about the giant iron ore mine proposed for northern Wisconsin. Should the mining company have been allowed to have input into how the legislation for that mine is written? We'll talk about the rapidly declining union membership in Wisconsin and all around the country and whether that's a good thing. And we'll talk about Donald Driver retiring from the Green Bay Packers. All right, let me introduce everybody. We have longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Once again, Kevin Fisher, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. Denise Calloway, community affairs and public relations professional. And of course, Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, first let's talk about the controversial mining legislation that is being discussed in Madison. There was so much news coverage this week about how the company that wants to open this $1.5 billion mine up north has made suggestions about what they would and would not like to see in the legislation. Is that absolutely outrageous, or is that exactly what you would expect from a company that would be making such a huge investment in the state of Wisconsin? Kevin, you spent a lot of time up there.
I spent 15 years in the state legislature, so I know, and this is not a criticism, it's just a statement of fact, that the assembly people and the state senators have not cornered the market on really good, sound, fundamental ideas. So they reach out and get help from staff people. They have a bipartisan staff that actually writes the bills so that they are legally effective and appropriate. And they do seek the expertise of any and all kinds of groups: police, fire, teacher unions, labor unions, pro-life, pro-choice, you name it. If the bill pertains or affects these groups, they're often called in and asked to shape the bill. So this is a very common practice. This story is a big fat nothing burger, but it's being perpetrated by people who want to divert attention from the merits of this really critical piece of legislation that is needed to create high-paying jobs in that part of the state that is clamoring, literally begging for these mining jobs. And some people, you know, the folks that are, well, where are the jobs? Where are the jobs? Those are the people that are throwing water on this mining legislation because it's partisan. They don't want the governor and they don't want legislative Republicans to get a huge economic development job creation victory.
Denise, the media is making it look like this company is writing their own legislation, and that's horrible.
Well, I mean, that is the way that it appears, but the basic question is, are we trying to write a mining bill that will have the necessary checks and balances and safeguards so we can have not just mining, but safe mining in Wisconsin? Or are we writing a bill that's going to give this company a leg up in terms of being able to come in and be the company that meets the qualifications for this so they can step right in, and when the legislation is passed, and we all know that it will be, that they can step in and begin the mining process? To me, that's the real question. I don't think there's a problem necessarily with a diverse number of groups coming in and providing their ideas. I don't think anybody, but maybe I'm old-fashioned, I don't think anybody but legislators who we elect should be writing laws that impact us. I don't think it should be companies. I don't think necessarily that it should be nonprofit groups or environmental groups. Do they all have a seat at the table to say, these are the types of concerns that we have, these are the things we'd like to see? Absolutely. But actually involved in writing the bill, that's not, I didn't elect anybody from that company to do that. So, and the problem that I have with this, quite frankly, is it has not been a level playing field. There has not been that same ability that the company has seen to write parts of this legislation. Environmentalists haven't had that same option. Can I just say real quick,
they don't write the bill. They may help and offer, and offer analysis or shape the formation of the bill, but they don't actually sit down there with pen and pencil and write the bill.
And they don't have to, because they've already told people what they want in it. So let's be clear.
Isn't this what lobbyists do all the time, though?
Lobbyists, yeah. They try to convince the Republicans to let them write the bill. And this is one of the dirtiest, most environmentally destructive industries in the world. And every mine that has been dug in Wisconsin has created environmental problems for where it's happening, and you have this happening at a very sensitive part of the state where it's just upriver from the Bad River, reservation, that is appalled that, there are acid deposits in these rocks that they're apparently just going to throw tons of into lakes and rivers and everything else. And you can draw on expertise about an industry, but you don't want an industry to write its own environmental regulations. That's absurd. And
well, they would use.
And by the way, and you talk plenty.
They would use the current.
By the way, this idea of high-paying jobs. Every time I read in a Journal Sentinel story that the average mining job, if this happens, is going to be $80,000 to $90,000 a year, I wonder, how is it that miners all over this country are in Appalachia and are desperately poor, even though they're working and risking their lives in mining, if we're going to have a mine here that's going to pay $80,000 to $90,000 for a job? There may be a couple management people who make that up there, but believe me, the miners are not going to make $80,000 to $90,000. And as a matter of fact, the Wisconsin Manufacturing Commerce says there will not be a job created from this mine in Governor Walker's term. It'll take 5 to 7 years to get a job out of this bill. It's not going to create some economic boon for Wisconsin. The fact that is the only job bill that Governor Walker and the Republicans have, and it won't produce jobs for 5 to 7 years, and probably much longer, because the federal Corps of Engineers, the Environmental Protection Agency, there are all kinds of environmental regulations that are going to be violated by this mine if they get to write the legislation.
But the reality is this will probably be approved in the next few weeks, right?
Yeah, it's being fast-tracked. I think it gets back to the question of how much involvement should special interest have in crafting legislation. And it's not just here in Wisconsin. I mean, if we go back and we take a look at the national experience around national health care, look at the interest that weighed in there, everyone from ARP to drug companies. They weighed in, they were accused too of having an undue influence on the crafting of the legislation that ultimately the Democrats put forward. If you listen to the last debate between Tommy Thompson and Tammy Baldwin, her accusation was that Thompson let too many of the drug companies become involved in the crafting of legislation that ultimately governs how seniors receive their drug prescriptions or how those are paid for. So it's not a new accusation, but I don't think much has been done to preclude how much influence is the right level of influence when it comes. If lobbyists are educating their legislators or a group of legislators on how certain legislation should be written that would either favor or hurt their industry, that's one thing. Weighing in is one thing, but to actually have legislation crafted that looks almost like their lobbyist
their wish list for how they'd operate this mine.
I would have problems with that. And again, I don't think that's what's happening here, but I do think that because this bill is being fast-tracked and because they've had previous experience with this same piece of legislation, they already know what
I've got one
will go
question.
and what won't.
I've got one question. If this is to create jobs in an area where it's just crying out for jobs, why do the Republicans refuse to hold a public hearing in the area where this mine is going to be?
Again, another smokescreen that really
It's not a smokescreen at all. It's just
nothing to do with the merits of the bill.
It absolutely does.
Because the people who are going to be the most directly impacted by it should not have to travel 4 hours to Madison to be able to make their voices heard at the same level as those mining companies that are sitting at the table, not only writing legislation, but having the chance to make sure their voices are heard first.
In the last legislative session, when this bill was one of the top priorities, there were indeed hearings.
It was down here in Milwaukee.
All right.
Yeah,
Next topic.
There haven't been any in the Ashland area.
Next topic. Labor union membership in Wisconsin is falling, and it's a trend that started way before Governor Walker's collective bargaining legislation. In Wisconsin and nationally, it now stands at about 11% of all workers, and that its lowest level since World War II. What do you do? What do you blame for the declining numbers? And is this a good thing or a bad thing for our country and our economy? And the argument you always hear is, well, the unions got too big and the wages got too high, so the jobs were sent overseas, so now we have to beat up the unions to bring the jobs back.
Yeah,
True?
I wish I knew the answer to this question because, as you know, I was a union organizer. And it's very difficult. And so are union negotiations, particularly in this climate, but even before the big recession and all of that. This idea that unions were just going in and grabbing and taking and becoming huge and all their members were getting rich and everybody else could just look back in awe at all their money. For years, in fact, going into the labor negotiations was how much are you going to give up this time? How much are you going to be forced to give up of your benefits, of your wages, of setting up a two-tier wage system? And what you say is true. The people who have demonized unions have won. They've won the argument with the public. And the truth of the matter is, until unions got some strength to bargain on behalf of workers, the middle class of America did not get created. The fact that ordinary working people in this country could work every day at a job and own a home and send their kids to college and have their kids have a much better life than they did, that was the work of the unions. It was the unions that made wages rise, and it's right-to-work states that make wages fall. And I don't know how the public has accepted this fact that all the unions are rich fat cats, because it sure is not true. They're struggling to hang on to decent wages for working people. Wages for working people have been stagnant for 30 years.
So as the union numbers fall, then does our economy start to rise again?
I think we've got a different kind of economy than we had from the 40s all the way up through the 80s. There are more individual entrepreneurs that are willing to test the waters to improve their own economic condition, and that tends not to be a place where unions can be effective or can be attractive. If you look at the number of startups or the number of people who are going it on their own, I'm one of them as a consultant. You'll find that the individual doesn't see the value of a collective approach to going toe-to-toe, as it were, with businesses that might be hell-bent on not playing fair. I do remember back, though, when I started teaching high school and back in the 70s, and I had to negotiate with the sister that was the principal.
That was at Dominican,
That was at Dominican, and I went in, I asked for a raise.
I saw one of your pupils last night.
Oh, who told the story?
Basketball game, but we'll save that discussion for some other time.
I said, sister, I need a raise. She says, what are you going to use it for? I said, I have to eat. Don't you know how to cook from scratch? She gave me a $200 raise and 3 paperback cookbooks. Now, at that time, if I had belonged to a union, that would not have played out that way. I accepted it. She offered it. That's how it ended. I don't know that I had any kind of fair advantage in that situation, and I think that's what unions are intended to protect. But now, as you go out individually, you make that decision that you want to go out into this economy and negotiate on your own, negotiate one-to-one with someone, and I don't know that the same kind of context exists for unions to operate in that kind of environment.
Denise, did the unions get so strong that the wages got too high and the legacy costs got too high, and so they hurt themselves from within?
Well, I think there's some truth to some of that in certain situations, but I think we always have to remember that there are always two sides of the bargaining table. So it's not just that the unions got so strong that this happened. You had management that was willing and able to say, okay, we'll meet that need, we'll do that. I think part of it came from the idea, if you take a look at when unions were really at their zenith, we're coming out of World War II, we're coming out of a time where there's great hope and optimism about what the country is going to be able to do, and we see that happening. So there's this feeling that the pie will just keep getting bigger we don't need to worry about this. It's all going to be okay because the pie will get bigger. And that's not what's happened in our economy. It hasn't happened for a long time. So I think my concern about this is that it's easy to say unions got too big, unions did this, unions did that. But there's some things that unions did that those of us who are not in unions benefit from every day. People are now paid overtime if they work more than 8 hours. You can take time for lunch every day. You have the opportunity to have a vacation, to have health care insurance, to have sick leaves. These basic things that are part of the fabric of the workforce in this country are only here because unions fought for them generations ago.
But now look at the number of people, if I can just cut in for a moment.
Defer
the number of people who have 401ks versus systemized pension systems, the number of people who will now be obligated to go out and purchase health care on their own versus having a program that they can buy into through their employer. I think the economy has just changed so dramatically that the individual versus the individual is more what we're going to see as opposed to the group versus the group.
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. But I think this idea that it's really easy to say now, unions bad, really negates the fact that some of the very people who are saying that the loudest are the people who benefited from what unions have been able to earn for all of us in the past.
Okay,
I'm not sure
for what was done 80, 90 years ago, thank you. But what's driving this?
The thing is, Kevin, it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't 80 or 90 years ago that these things happened.
And people are losing health care today.
These are things that happened and changes that took place in the workforce just a few generations ago.
All right, let's move
based on what
it to
people
today.
learned.
But will the jobs come back?
Well, I don't know. What's driving the reduction in unions today is the deterioration of private sector unions. Private sector businesses don't want unions, and people who work in the private sector don't want to belong to unions, especially if they're strong-armed to pay union dues. So I foresee an even greater effort on the part of government unions, public sector unions, to inflate their ranks. And I'm not sure that,
and we all know what the effort was 2 years ago in this state to address what was happening with public sector unions.
Well, we didn't go to hell in a handbasket, that's for sure. Now, we know there's this harmonious marriage between unions and the Democratic Party. That will continue even more so because of the ranks in the private sector unions decreasing by the day. And I'm not sure that's going to bode well for taxpayers because they see, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, they see average salaries and benefits for public sector employees much higher than for private sector employees. So I think
you said it, they were against unions.
Well, government unions are going to have to, if they want to restore what they've lost in some degree or fashion, they have to abandon their stance on compensation and get rid of some of their arcane rules. Otherwise, they will have a public relations problem with taxpayers.
All right, shifting gears. Green Bay Packer Donald Driver announced the other day that he's retiring now at the ripe old age of 37. He retires as the all-time leading pass receiver for Green Bay and one of the most beloved players in the history of the franchise. Is he so well-liked because he was a great player or because he has such a great personality, Denise, or both?
I think it's really both. I mean, here you have a guy who really is the model for an American success story. He spends part of his life homeless, living in his family's car. He applies himself and works hard to make opportunities for himself in college, to make opportunities for himself in the NFL, and he never forgot where he was or who he was. Generous to a fault to the community of Green Bay and even here in Milwaukee in terms of doing what he could do, using the influence he could have to raise money and to help support organizations. I think what people see and Donald Driver is the guy you'd like to live next door to. And I think that's why he's so popular with fans. I think, that's why fans wanted to see him have one more chance to play.
Well, 10 years from now, will he be considered like as super popular as a Bart Starr or a Paul Hornung?
I think so, because I don't think he's going to remove himself from this community, meaning the whole state, to the degree that most other former players have done, where once their career ends with the Packers or any other of our sports teams, they just move on. But I think he's so invested here that people will see him more and more and more in some of their ordinary roles, whether it's pitching a product or working for some type of charitable cause, that he'll become an even more familiar face and an even more likable person for this community. The one really outstanding thing I find about Donald Driver is his commitment to his family. You know, I know that there are a lot of athletes that the minute they make a little bit, their families glam on to them. And they, as Denise pointed out, they don't show the kind of humility or the kind of commitment to their families that I think some of them should. I think he just went way beyond in terms of generosity. He's such a self-effacing person that's the stuff that makes him really likable. And that's the stuff that will endear him over the long haul.
Some player 10 years ago going on a dancing show and have everybody not only
well, that might have been the end of their career.
Well, actually, that particular dancing show has had a lot of football players on it.
But not as good as Donald.
But the thing, no one's ever really been able to define the term charisma, but when somebody's got it, you know it. And you know, he's one of the, you know, the reason why he's pitching so many products and gets so much commercial work, and he's someone you can imagine his next career could be movie star, you know, like Jim Brown or something. He has multiple talents besides just being a real decent individual. I would think in 10 years we will still be hearing about him or watching him on a big screen somewhere, to tell you the truth.
Well, what helps and will make sure that he's always remembered is when you're number one, all right? When you're number one in the Green Bay Packer books for receiving and receiving yards, I mean, my goodness, that's better than Sterling Sharp, better than James Lofton, better than Boyd Dollar and Carroll Dale, and even Paul Hornung, who caught a lot of passes, even though he was a running back. That's number one. Number two, in this day and age in professional sports, to stay with one team. Loyalty means nothing. Right. It's out the window. You come out of college, you play a few years, you wind up with somebody else who wants to pay you more money. There are no Robin Yountz anymore, and yet here comes Donald Driver. And I think, too, it's been mentioned about family, coming from nowhere, coming from being homeless. He was just a class act. He always said the right things and always did the right things. And that's why people were out there at 3 in the morning the other night waiting to get free tickets.
In below zero
weather to be at his farewell
party.
That's
the one bad thing about this, really, for me, is that I think it's wonderful that the Packers want to recognize what he's been able to do and accomplish for the franchise, as well as for himself professionally and personally. I just hate the fact that it's happening on a Wednesday at 11 o'clock, and there's only enough. Maybe I'm speaking for myself, and I didn't get a ticket. and they're not more than 1,000 people who are there to show their appreciation. Maybe it's a little bit of hyperbole, but I think you could come close to filling that stadium for a tribute to Donald Trump.
Nobody wanted to see him go out the way he did. I think we all wanted to see him have a bigger impact at the end, but at least he didn't hang on like Bart Starr did when it got to be very sad the way he played his last few years.
All right. Well, you know, it's not every day that a county sheriff can make it into the national news headlines, but that's exactly what's happened here in Milwaukee in recent days. It all started with a radio ad, and, well, just a warning, Rick Horowitz's radio may sound a little bit different from yours. Rick.
I'm Sheriff David Clark, and I want to talk to you about something personal, your safety. It's no longer a spectator sport. It's more like paintball, only with live ammo. Are you ready, or are you going to wimp out and wait for the police? In a world where politicians make dangerous budget cuts to my department, calling 911 is no longer your best option. We may not be able to arrive in time. I may be in a TV studio somewhere, or polishing my cowboy belt buckle, so you need to be ready. When the wolf is at the door with a gun, you can beg for mercy from a violent criminal, hide under the bed, you can wet your pants and hope you electrocute your attacker. You can even waste time wondering how wolves can hold guns, since when do they have opposable thumbs? Or you can do what I do, you can be packing, and the bigger the better. I'm packing the biggest one in Milwaukee County. The politicians say it's not my business to tell you to arm yourself. I say the sheriff's business is whatever Sheriff David Clark says it is. We're a full-service department. We respond to everything. The thing we respond to best is criticism. Our response time to criticism is immediate, and I have a really deep voice. I'm going to use that really deep voice to scare the bejesus out of you if I don't get my way. The media keeps trying to censor me. They'll even put my words on the front pages of their newspapers and all over their TV news shows. That's how devious their censorship is. That's a roughing the passer penalty in my book. Are you ready to throw the flag on them? We're partners now. You have a duty to protect my reputation. Can I count on you? I need you in the game, so get a gun or a really big horse. This ego massage brought to you by the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm, enjoy the game, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Rick,